Hamas. It's a name that's all over the headlines, but who are they, really? I mean, beyond the breaking news alerts, what are their actual origins, their goals, and where do they stand in the world today? So in this explainer, we're going to try to cut through some of that noise. We'll go straight to the sources, breaking down key documents and official reports to get a clearer picture of the organization behind the name.
Okay, let's start with a really powerful statement that pretty much sets the stage for the current international debate. This is from a letter sent by a group of 34 U.S. senators to the United Nations just last year. Their argument is incredibly stark. They're saying that Hamas's actions are, in their words, indistinguishable from groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And that comparison? Well, it's really at the heart of the high-stakes political pressure that's building right now.
So why the sudden push? It really comes down to this number. 1,400. According to that same letter from the senators, this is how many people were killed in the attacks on October 7th. It was this single event that just catapulted the group back into the global spotlight with such incredible force.
And that leads us right into our first topic, this renewed international focus on Hamas, and specifically the big push to get the UN to officially designate it as a terrorist organization. So here are the core arguments the senators are making in their letter. Of course, they cite the attack's death toll and the more than 240 people who were kidnapped. But they also point to what they call a glaring loophole in international finance that they argue allows money to keep flowing to the group. But here's a really key allegation, the claim that Hamas diverts humanitarian aid. They're not just talking about seizing donated goods, but even repurposing civilian infrastructure, like water pipes, to build weapons.
Okay, but to really get the weight of these arguments, we need to understand the organization itself. So let's back up for a second and ask a really basic question. Based on the source material, what is Hamas? Well, this definition comes straight from the National Counterterrorism Center. Hamas, which is actually an acronym for the Islamic resistance movement, is a Sunni Islamist group. It was founded way back in late 1987 during the first Palestinian Intifada, or uprising, and it basically grew out of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, this slide is super important because it gets at a really critical aspect of Hamas, its dual structure. On one hand, it operates as a socio-political body, and it was strong enough to actually win the legislative elections back in 2006. But on the other hand, you have its military wing, which carries out attacks and, as the sources point out, receives direct support from Iran. This duality is absolutely central to the whole global debate over how to deal with them. All right, so what does the group officially say it wants? What are its goals? For that, we've got to look at its founding document, the 1988 Charter. And you can see here, the Charter's main objectives, as reported by counterterrorism sources, are pretty unambiguous. The ultimate goal is to establish an Islamic state where Israel is now, and this part is absolutely critical. The Charter also rejects all past peace agreements made between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. It's basically positioning itself as the alternative to any kind of negotiated peace. Of course, this ideology didn't just appear out of nowhere, right? It's been shaped by decades of conflict. So a quick look at a timeline of some key events really shows us how we got to where we are today. So the timeline kicks off with its formation in 87. Fast forward a decade to 97, and the U.S. designates it a terrorist organization. Then you have 2006, and this is a huge moment. Hamas wins the legislative elections. That victory leads to a violent clash with its rival party, Fatah, and by 2007, Hamas seizes what's known as de facto control of the Gaza Strip. Basically, they're running the place in practice, even without formal recognition. The years that follow are just cycles of conflict and shaky ceasefires with Israel, all leading up to the October 7th attack in 2023, which the sources call its deadliest assault ever. Okay, so with all that history as context, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. How is Hamas designated around the world? And, where does its support come from? And this brings us right back to that senator's letter we started with. As you can see, a whole bunch of countries and major organizations already classify Hamas as a terrorist organization. We're talking about the United States, the entire European Union, the UK, Canada, Japan, and others. Now, when it comes to external support, the sources really point primarily to one country. According to the U.S. State Department, Iran provides over $100 million every year to Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups. And look, this isn't just an outside assessment. This is coming from inside Hamas itself.
Back in 2017, a senior leader, Yahya Sinwar, actually said that relations with Iran are excellent, and he called them the largest supporter of their military wing with money and weapons. So that quote directly confirms that financial and military connection. So, we've seen the push for new sanctions, we've traced the group's origins all the way from an uprising to a governing power, and we've seen its goals laid out in its own words. It all leads to a really complex final question for you to think about. As the world figures out how to respond to a group like Hamas, how much weight should be given to its history and its stated ideology versus its actions on the ground today? It's definitely something to chew on.